Politicians campaign on promises: jobs, growth, stability, fairness. They speak directly to voters. Simple words, clear goals. But once elections end, reality begins. Budgets stretch across thousands of pages. Trade-offs multiply. Forecasts replace slogans. And slowly, another voice enters the room. Not elected, not visible on ballots, but increasingly decisive. Economists, trained in data, models, probability, risk. At first, they were advisors. Numbers people, background figures. Over time, something changed. Their recommendations stopped being optional. Their frameworks became standard. Their assumptions shaped outcomes. This wasn't a dramatic takeover. No tanks, no speeches. It was quieter than that. As economies grew more complex, governments leaned on expertise. And expertise began to steer power. To understand how this happened, we need to go back. Far back. The early 20th century transformed economies rapidly. Industrial production surged. Global trade expanded. Financial systems interconnected. Growth accelerated. So did fragility. Then came collapse. The Great Depression struck with historic force. Banks failed by the thousands. Unemployment surged past 25%. Entire economies froze. Political instinct faltered. Traditional thinking offered few answers. Into that vacuum stepped new ideas. Economists proposed explanations and solutions. In 1936, John Maynard Keynes published the general theory. He argued governments could stabilize economies through spending, borrowing during downturns, supporting demand when markets failed. Other thinkers explored debt cycles, monetary instability, systemic risk. For the first time, abstract theory promised practical rescue. Governments listened. President Roosevelt's New Deal reflected this shift. Large-scale programs, public works, employment initiatives. Behind them stood advisors trained in economics, designing frameworks, measuring outcomes, justifying expansion. Then came war. World War II demanded total mobilization. Factories retooled overnight. Prices regulated. Resources rationed. Managing entire economies required precision. Economists stepped directly into government. In the United States, hundreds joined agencies like the Office of Price Administration. In Britain, Keynes himself advised the Treasury on war finance. Planning required measurement. National income accounting emerged rapidly. GDP was formalized. Economic output became something governments could track, compare, and manage. When the war ended, the role of expertise did not retreat. Leaders feared another collapse. They wanted tools, early warnings, control. In 1946, the United States passed the Employment Act. It created the Council of Economic Advisors, a permanent body, staffed by professional economists, reporting directly to the president. This was new. Economic judgment was no longer informal advice. It became institutionalized authority. Similar bodies appeared elsewhere. Statistical offices expanded. Forecasting units grew. Economic modeling entered policy design. Globally, the trend accelerated. At Bretton Woods in 1944, new institutions emerged. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Their purpose was stability. Their language was economics. Their staff were experts. By the post-war era, a pattern had formed. Politicians still set goals, but economists increasingly determined how those goals were pursued. Quietly, systematically, permanently. This was the beginning of a new kind of power. Not seized, but delegated. Not announced, but embedded. By the 1960s, the system seemed to work. Growth was strong. Unemployment stayed low. Confidence ran high. Governments managed demand. Economists fine-tuned policy. The post-war order appeared stable. Then reality intruded. Oil shocks hit in the 1970s. Energy prices surged. Production slowed. Inflation rose sharply. Growth stalled. A new word entered the vocabulary: stagflation. The existing playbook failed. Stimulus fueled inflation. Restraint deepened unemployment. The models broke. This opened the door to new ideas. Milton Friedman argued inflation was monetary. Too much money. Too little discipline. He warned discretion invited abuse. Rules, he said, would outperform politics. His arguments spread quickly. Policymakers were listening. In 1979, Paul Volcker became chairman of the Federal Reserve. He applied these principles aggressively. Interest rates surged near 20%. The pain was severe. Recession followed. Unemployment spiked. But inflation collapsed. The lesson stuck. Economic credibility mattered more than popularity. Across the Atlantic, similar shifts occurred. Margaret Thatcher reshaped Britain. Deregulation, privatization, supply-side reforms. In the United States, Ronald Reagan cut taxes, expanded defense spending. Deficits grew. Economists stood close to power, advising, justifying, designing. Think tanks multiplied. Academic papers shaped policy debates. Economic language dominated governance. Then came a crucial structural change. Independence. In 1989, New Zealand restructured its central bank. Clear inflation targets. Operational freedom from politicians. The idea spread rapidly. Britain followed in 1997. The Bank of England gained independence. Europe went further. The European Central Bank launched in 1998, designed to be insulated from national politics entirely. By the early 2000s, over 50 countries had independent central banks. Leadership followed a pattern. Advanced degrees, academic backgrounds, technical expertise. Economists were no longer advisors. They were decision-makers. The rationale was simple. Elected officials face elections. Short-term pressure. Temptation to overspend. Independent experts could focus on long-term stability. Markets approved. Inflation fell globally. Expectations stabilized. Capital flowed more freely. Finance ministries evolved in parallel. Treasuries professionalized. PhD economists filled senior civil service roles. Forecasting became continuous. At the global level, coordination intensified. The Washington Consensus emerged in the 1990s. Fiscal discipline, trade liberalization, privatization. The IMF and World Bank promoted these principles. Loans tied to reforms. Conditions enforced through technical assessment. Economics became a shared language. Universities fed talent into policy pipelines. Chicago, MIT, Harvard, LSE. Conferences reinforced consensus. Journals set boundaries of debate. New models dominated. Dynamic stochastic general equilibrium frameworks. Complex equations simulated entire economies. They promised clarity, precision, control. Central banks adopted them widely. So did treasuries. By the turn of the century, the transformation was complete. Political authority remained visible, but operational power rested elsewhere. In models, in assumptions, in institutions shielded from voters. Not through conspiracy, through design. Expertise had become infrastructure. Quiet, durable, and difficult to challenge. The 21st century cemented the shift. Crisis after crisis placed economists at the center. In 2008, the global financial system cracked. Banks froze. Credit vanished. Markets panicked. At the helm of the U.S. Federal Reserve stood Ben Bernanke, a scholar of the Great Depression, an academic turned policymaker. His response followed theory. Liquidity first. Confidence second. Interest rates fell to zero. Balance sheets expanded. Quantitative easing entered public vocabulary. In Europe, the crisis spread differently. Sovereign debt trembled. The euro itself came into question. Mario Draghi, an economist, led the European Central Bank. His pledge was simple. Whatever it takes. Markets believed him. Later, Christine Lagarde continued the approach. Legal background, but shaped by global economic institutions. The pattern repeated. Central banks coordinated. Swap lines opened. Models guided intervention. Stability returned. But at a cost. Balance sheets never fully shrank. Emergency tools became standard instruments. Then came 2020. A pandemic halted global activity. Factories stopped. Services shut down. The response was immediate and massive. Central banks cut rates again. Governments spent trillions. Asset purchases surged. Economic teams designed rescue programs. Business loans. Household transfers. Wage subsidies. The scale was unprecedented. So was the speed. Decisions that once took years now happened in days. By 2026, the structure is clear. Most major central banks are led by economists. Finance ministries rely on forecasting units. Independent fiscal councils review budgets. Markets react to data releases instantly. A single sentence can move trillions. The benefits are real. Inflation, over decades, has been lower than before the 1980s. Recessions, in many regions, less frequent. Communication, more transparent. But trade-offs remain. Models depend on assumptions. Shocks expose blind spots. Groupthink narrows alternatives. Democratic distance has widened. Voters elect leaders. But key economic levers sit beyond the ballot box. This is not a coup in the traditional sense. No tanks, no speeches, no declarations. It is structural power, built over decades, justified by stability, maintained by expertise. So what does this mean for you? Interest rates affect your mortgage. Inflation shapes your savings. Policy choices ripple into daily life. Understanding who makes these decisions matters. It clarifies where accountability lies and where it doesn't. It explains why policies often feel inevitable, why alternatives are framed as irresponsible, why debates sound technical, not moral. History shows systems evolve. Expert-led governance rose from necessity, from crisis, from complexity. But no system is permanent. Balance matters. Diverse perspectives, transparent limits, public understanding. For individuals, resilience starts locally. Diversified savings, skills that outlast cycles, assets with intrinsic value, gold, land, productive businesses. These have endured policy shifts before. Knowledge is the final safeguard. It turns abstraction into awareness, and awareness into choice. The silent transfer of power wasn't hidden. It was documented, recorded in institutions, laws, and crises. Once you see it, you can navigate it, not with fear, but with clarity. If this analysis helped you understand how modern economic power really works, consider subscribing. The story isn't unfolding in secret. It's written plainly. In history,